but that feedback was helpful because I do I don't like the dissonance of looking at the stream health and it's low, and then like just all these different experiences, including this one. Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Thursday. Time for some more HubSpot onboarding conversations with Willem Reus. How you doing, man?
Very good. And good afternoon for the ones on my side of the puddle. So
Yes.
today we're going to talk a little bit more about the onboarding, but also about the mindset and about whether that should be top down or bottoms up.
Yeah. And I love this idea because we had a great conversation in the customer platform hug yesterday. Always can count on some deep stuff getting talked about there, and it was funny. And I feel like maybe it's a little prideful, my ability to kind of tie the conversation wherever it's going to where we want it to be. And our episode was supposed to be about smart CRM versus hubs and what's the difference. And it's like clearly we could not even get to that conversation without addressing concerns of like, how are we getting everybody in the system? Like, I can define smart CRM for you, but if we can't relate it to what it's doing for the business, then it doesn't mean anything. And things like that. And this is, I started asking this question early on in this journey of agency, of being inside of the ecosystem. Like, okay, I've been inside these places where it's so hard to get adoption, to get alignment, to create change. Now let me help from the outside, or let me try and help from the outside. And I started asking questions like, how are we so far down the line? Like, CRM's not new. This concept of creating scalability in businesses is not new, yet people are challenged, right? Like, and I started asking questions about that. And, so this concept of basically who's responsible for it, whose job is it? Like, at the end of the day, it's everybody's. Like, there's top down
Exactly.
and bottom up. But, I look forward to talking about like, let's talk about some of the consequences of either or, and then maybe help some people figure out how to do both at the same time, which is the challenge, but that's where we need to get to if we're going to
Yeah,
be successful.
but I think that first of all, and we have said this a number of times, and you and I know this better than anybody else, but HubSpot is a means to an end, and we should always keep that in mind. So a company shouldn't evolve around, ooh, let's try to make HubSpot work. That shouldn't be the business model. The business model is to get an outcome, and HubSpot is an excellent way to get there. So then the question is, okay, how do we get there in the most efficient way? And of course, that helps if customers are onboarded correctly with the portal, but then you have the users. Can you share any cases where you've seen that they're basically the end users, so the boots on the ground, had issues with using the tool?
Yeah. Uh, oh man, can I get exact? Well, I think the thing I
Try
can
to be
share,
general. We are not here to
right?
name and shame.
Well, definitely not naming, but like trying to find like use cases that people start to connect the dots to. But I think it connects to the idea where when you don't have this organizational approach and you're the bottom up person, like, hey, we need to do this. We're being asked to do things better. That's about the instruction that we're getting from leadership. They agreed to invest in HubSpot, but they have delegated that down to somebody else to bring it in and train people. And there's this thing that I think most people know about where you're always trying to find that click for the individual that you want starting to use HubSpot or to accept the value of HubSpot, let's say. Like, this is how you can trust HubSpot to help you do your job, right? And it's always interesting that it's different. for everybody. It could be the first time they see a meeting link getting created and they immediately get like, okay, now the back and forth that we have to do to get, like, that's 15 minutes every time I have to do that. That's valuable. Or it's the email template, or it's, oh, now I can see the data that Willem talked to this customer and I can just see it now. Like, it's different for everybody. And I think that relates, to this issue of, because that moment's different for everybody. The moments before that, where we're trying to figure out how it's supposed to help us, like, do our job, because I've been doing it this certain way for a long time, right? And I can't, like, contextualize how I'm supposed to work it in, to my daily. Does that answer the question that you asked?
It answers a lot. For me, there's also the thing that with pressure building up everywhere, basically. So what I see a lot is that the company is becoming more and more siloed. And I'm talking in general right now. So that means that, for instance, you had to do, you as a sales rep had to do 20 calls a day to close 2 deals. And right now you have to do 60 calls a day to close 1.5 deals. That means that for you, your workload increased. Where do you cut corners? And what I see happening quite a bit is that if you close a deal or if you work a deal, why would you put everybody who's involved in the deal as a sales rep? It's likely not going to close. And if it closes, well, happy days, who cares? You're not measured on your admin. You're only measured on the outcome. But that means that if you have a marketeer, and that marketeer is like, okay, so attribution, that doesn't work anymore if there's no contact associated to the deal. And if you basically build up the pressure at certain points, something will break. And usually it's the connection between the departments that breaks, and the product is used as a couple of point solutions instead of a platform.
I mean, that's a great way to put it. Got some feedback from Nick saying it's a little hard to hear, Willem, but loving this. So,
sorry.
Probably just maybe speak a little louder. That's probably all we can hope to do about it right now. But no, that's a great way to put it. Something's got to give. And that's, was always my concern that I would share with leadership. And that's the part we get to, right? Like, I'm brought in to do digital transformation. Like I can, as one person, like, do it, for the organization. And the reason I love doing it with HubSpot is that it kind of forces transparency where there has been none. It creates a space for transparency to even happen, right? But as you start interacting with all these different teams and you see the lack of handoffs, you see the disconnect for having to put in the same data, 5 times, it is now my job, or I took it upon myself to explain to leadership, what the problem is with that, right? And that I can highlight that for you as a leader, but I cannot change that team's processes, right? I can't, like, change their behavior. They have leaders, they have jobs to do, and none of those jobs include using HubSpot at that point, usually. So it's an immense amount of change. So when we talk about the difference between bottom up and top down, and I'm having this conversation a lot with admins, it's like the awareness of the very challenging spot that you can be put in, where you have been asked to, like, make HubSpot work, or hey, we're going to get serious about CRM, or we want to centralize customer data because we know how important that is. But you can't create the space alone, let's say, to make what needs to happen outside of HubSpot, happen. That's where, like, one of your primary roles as an admin is giving leadership, what they need to create that space. And when we say top down, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like why top down doesn't work, like by itself, right, is almost for the same purpose. Like you got to have that person on the ground creating that, like, practical space for the day to day. And it's like, oh, this is how you just easily do emails from here instead of from over here, or instead of this sheet, you're going to put it in HubSpot, and creating that space there to say, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, because every time leaders just hand me a new project, it doesn't go well, right?
Yeah. And are you, as a leader, really listening to your people? Are you making sure that you create a culture where you can drive changes top down as well as bottom up? Because if you try to implement something, and I'm not talking specifically about a certain platform, I'm talking really in general, how do you make sure you already have champions in place when you roll something out? And I think that if you can do that, if you can have employees that you can show, look, this is working, that people will adopt it. But that will mean that top down, basically, I'm not going to say forces, but kind of forces a decision to come bottoms up as well. And if there's a certain synergy there, then I think that almost every project will be a success.
Yeah. And that's what, when I talk about like why leadership can't, like the worst thing they can do is delegate like HubSpot's strategic use, for the business, right? Like at some point you have to be communicating what HubSpot is supposed to be doing for the business. And if you weren't there in the purchase process and you just kind of signed off on the budget, it's very hard for you, like it's impossible for you to communicate that, actually, because it's not about getting more leads, sending more emails, automating sales outreach, like all these things that when we get it as a point solution, you might communicate that to the organization, but that's not, that is something one person can just do, right, without a bunch of organizational help. And like I'll never forget, like it's a mindset, like your role as a leader to create the space for this stuff to work, for your teams to be successful, with tools and without tools. When I was having an issue, bringing in HubSpot, talking to a service team, and they were at that time bringing in an updated version of the ERP, which took them from on-premise to cloud. And I sat through a 2-hour training about the new way that they were going to have to do some of the communications with customers. And you could tell, like I didn't know about the process before that, but you could tell that it made the process worse in every way for this team. And through that journey, at some point, the IT leader says, love it or hate it, this is our ERP. And I told my boss at that time, I was like, look, when everybody hates it, that needs to matter. Like, that needs to matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the question, if you're the person working with this, and if I as leadership tell you, well, you know what, you got to deal with this, and you still have the same targets, so basically work like 10% harder, and you want to go home on time to see the wife and kids and the 3 dogs and whatever, what does that mean? It means you will start cutting corners. It will mean that you will create a culture where if I'm sitting here, you walk up to me and you say, I have a question, I will say off, basically, because I don't have time for that crap. And I think that is why it's a fair comment to say it has to come from the top, because whoever implemented that ERP and realized likely at that point, like, ooh, this is going to have a massive impact, should have thought about that part as well, about the humans that are involved in the equation and what the impact is for them. Because if, let's, for now, make a ridiculous example. If leadership would say, you know what, from now on, you will get 10% more commission if you put in the same amount of hours, which means that you will create, I don't know, 10% less emails or whatever, or leads or anything like that. Likely everybody would have been like, ooh, this is golden. And that's, I know that's oversimplified, but if you can allow everybody to see the vision and where it fits into the vision, and that this is better for them as well. How do you communicate that? Just by saying love it or hate it?
Definitely not that. And this is where like the difference between and often when I rail against HubSpot being managed overall by IT or by systems administrators, like their role is usually break, fix, make sure it's working, right? Like period. Not make sure it's working for the people using it, right?
Absolutely.
The making sure that's where, whether it's RevOps, whether it's a HubSpot admin, somebody else has to be in charge. And this could be even a sales leader, a marketing leader, right? Who's responsible for making sure the platform is successful for the people using it, right? That's why this whole conversation is important.
But if we would compare it to Microsoft Excel, I know HubSpot is a tiny bit more complicated than that, but you could say IT is responsible for Excel running on your computer, but they're not responsible for telling you how to put in a formula. And that's how I kind of see the role of IT with HubSpot. Yes, I'm going to say IT is responsible for the DNS settings. You as a HubSpot admin do not need to know what the IP, how to change any of that kind of stuff. Single sign-on, I'm going to say quite the same. As HubSpot admin, should you know how to set that up? Or should you just get IT involved?
Yeah. And that's where, like, again, helping people think about their role as admins. Like, you got 6 hubs working in all departments of the organization now. Like, you can do your best. Like, that's why I bring it back to, like, all you can do is be aware of the current state. That's literally the only thing you can control. And then understand all the inputs and outputs, including HubSpot just adding new things to the portal without telling you. And just being aware is step one, because then you can communicate, the way you need to. And we got a good comment here that I was hoping we could work through, and maybe we could give Aurora some advice here. She says, this has been a major topic of discussion as our company is currently considering cutting HubSpot. I've invested significant effort as an admin to drive adoption, but it's challenging when leaders and management haven't logged into HubSpot for 3 months. Salespeople notice that management isn't even reviewing the reports I've spent considerable time creating to help them track KPIs and results, which undermines the platform's value. Although I've started developing strategies to encourage the team to leverage more automation, sequences, and increase engagement, this typically falls outside the usual responsibilities of an admin. First of all, we hear this every day at this point, right? And we're past the point of onboarding, but I think to your point of what we have been talking about, the user onboarding, this onboarding activity is always going. Like there's no like, okay, we're done now, right? And so what would you, any tips here for Aurora?
For me, something to realize is that this is a bad spot to be in. And it's not like, ooh, that's the final comment or something like that. No, that is something that we should all realize. Ideally, if you work with HubSpot, HubSpot should be a non-negotiable. it should be like, okay, but if we pull HubSpot out of the company, that's like pulling the engine out of a car and still wanting to drive it. So in a way, yes, it's the engine. Who sees the engine of a car? I mean, like that's an irrelevant part, right? You can just pull that out. How much of the processes depend on HubSpot and what can you make clear? Like, okay, this is how we run the company. These are the processes in place. Are you aware that if we pull HubSpot out, that we potentially cannot track, I don't know, deals anymore if they have Sales Hub? What do we do with the marketing efforts? Because if we look at short term, if I would run a company and if I would be a venture capitalist and only look at 3-month exit from the company, I would start with firing everybody who's in marketing. They don't generate return of investment in 3 months' time, so let's just sack them all. But if you think about long term, marketing has a significant ROI, despite that you don't see everything because of the dark funnel. But I hope you also understand the part where I say, if I'm a venture capitalist, then just they're out of there. So right now for the company, the direction that they should consider is, are we going to accept the losses and that we will downgrade significantly and potentially never get back up and pull HubSpot out because that's a tremendous, cost for the company, and likely at the same time stop investing in marketing because that's something that I've myself also seen with a number of my customers, that they went from 30 marketeers to 2.
Yeah,
Or is the company really going to go for a more, holistic approach?
right. And I think that's the dichotomy that we can see here, because clearly the admin is invested in the situation, but it wouldn't be hard to predict that almost nobody else is. So like, again, the admin's role for me is awareness and creating awareness, right? So, and not everybody is in this safe space to be able to challenge like in this way. So we understand that. But I think in this situation, like, what are we solving by cutting HubSpot, right? And either it's going to create gaps, and if it has been used in certain ways, we've got to solve for those gaps now. There's a lot of change management related to that, bringing in a new software, right? Or like, okay, let's cut HubSpot, let's bring in the next one, or go back to Sheets. Either way, like, whatever tools we're using at this point, like that's not the part that matters. So cutting HubSpot when there should have been agreement on why it's in the organization and what we're using it for, like bringing in another tool, bringing in a new Band-Aid, that's not going to solve anything, right? If we're in this spot, or it's unlikely to, I will say. Sometimes just the refresh will help, right? So again, as much as I love HubSpot, the best CRM, the best ERP, the best tool of any kind is the one that gets used consistently. Absolutely. In a standardized way, right? And if there's in organizations where just the culture around this thing that you're trying to do is so toxic and destructive, like really the only, almost like a tumor, you just gotta, I never thought in my life that I would be relating HubSpot to that. But that's where every organization is truly different, because there's humans involved, there's different sets of humans, and you got to manage that, right? But that's also why I found my way out of organizations, because I was brought in to do a thing. The environment's not here to be successful at doing that thing. So I can understand why leadership had to make that change, right? And that's where, as an admin, that's the only thing you're in control over, right? And she says, HubSpot has essentially become a repository of contacts at enterprise level, but it seems leaders don't fully grasp the
Even on
significant
enterprise level.
impact that they have on its adoption. Yeah. And then we get to the point, despite my efforts, things aren't moving forward, and it's clear that leadership plays a crucial role in driving meaningful change, right?
Yeah.
So, and
For
that's the
me,
tough spot to be in.
The
right?
question is, what can you do with, and I would especially, because is there the comment in the comment, is there if there's marketing and sales hub? Or because with enterprise, I assume that there would also be sales in there.
If
That's
it's
a
just a
dangerous
repository
assumption.
for contacts, yeah, I'd say definitely marketing probably. But yeah, that's the common, and again, that's why we rail against like point solution. What is it doing for the business? Like you can tell once it becomes a repository for contacts. And I've seen this with any kind of system, right? You put a list of people in front of the salesperson, and then they're gonna do what they can to reach out to those people and do their job as a salesperson to sell to them. If the system isn't built to support that, they're creating their own spreadsheets, they're managing it in Outlook, they're doing what they need to do to manage the process, right? So it's and that's essentially their CRM. So collectively you have an unintentional CRM like throughout the organization. And that's the common consistent one that's getting used. So that's the one that everybody stays in, right?
But what I'm thinking about is you, of course, have the marketing department. And right now, I don't want to necessarily go into product. I just want to go into departments. You have the marketing department. Ideally, for me, the marketing department would start with the deals. Then you have the sales department picking up on the deals. And I'm also considering an option where, for instance, sales works with Salesforce. If you set up the teams from HubSpot, if you set up the deals from HubSpot, you are absolutely sure that that sync works flawlessly. That way, if sales can't close the deal for whatever reason, you can sync that over to marketing, have a nurture flow, and that sort of thing. And it means that it's a lot easier for sales to actually involve marketing. And what we see a lot is that the customers or the deals with customers that don't close but are pushed out saying, ooh, this is not a good fit right now. A fair amount still close after a year or something like that. So the nurture flows really do help. If you can prove that, if I can prove to you as a manager, look, we are doing some nurturing, there is coming, I don't know, 80K a month in from that. Do you want to cut HubSpot and lose that capability? But then the question is something like that set up?
Right. Yeah. And I think that there's lots of ways we could go with this. And I think it's a great conversation leading to next week. We got or in September, we'll say we've got some exciting guests joining us on the show to talk about, how we can solve for these issues in various ways. So yeah, this is a challenge, and I think just the awareness of being in that tough spot, sometimes, the first step you got to take, and we're happy to, hopefully this was valuable, to just talk through this stuff, and we're here. If others are having issues, we'd love to, help where we can. So I thank you for another, great session, Willem.
My pleasure.
And until next week, find the opportunity and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.
See you next week.